Scenes 17, 18 and 19 are all very, very short scenes, and in the folio version that's Act 4, Scene 3, Act 4, Scene 4, Act 4, Scene 5. And these just sort of set up, really get us ready for Act 5. They set up this conflict to come where Cordelia fights, and you know, he's sort of there to try and stop Goneril and Regan, and sets up this reconciliation between Cordelia and her dad, King Lear. We're told it's Kent sort of on stage at you know, initially in this scene, and he, remember, sent this letter to Cordelia explaining what's happened. The first gentleman explains to Kent about line 12, and she took these letters, read them in my presence, and now and then an ample tear trilled down her delicate cheek. We've got these images of feminine beauty that were expected from Jacobean times. The ample tear, you know, that sort of fullness, that female fullness. We get it in a second with the ripe lip as well. So it's female beauty that would have been recognised by a Jacobean audience. But it's also a religious image, you know, the holy water coming from Cordelia's eyes. Just like, remember, Gloucester's had this blood trickling down from his eyes as well. And then we're told it seemed she was a queen over her passion, who most rebel-like sought to king over her. Now, again, the Jacobean ideal for a woman was someone who was totally in control of their emotions, entirely domestic, and this sort of calm, healing presence, very much like the Virgin Mary. And that's what that's describing, you know, that Cordelia was in charge of her passions. Compare that to the animalistic nature of Goneril and Regan, who were full of ambition and anger and hatred and also lust. It's that total contrast that Shakespeare's setting out there. But also the way it's described, it's queens and rebel-like, so you get the sense of power there. And that carries on that Jacobean tradition of suggesting that kings and queens and the correct rulers are God's flesh. They are anointed, as Lear was called earlier. So in that little speech, we've got all those things sort of coming into play, which is great for context. You have Cordelia linked to religion, linked to ideas of Jacobean beauty, and linked to the traditional ideas of Jacobean king and queenship, being about being God on earth. So we have all those things that are in play. That sets up the ending being so shocking, as O'Toole talks about, because Cordelia is set up as the ideal person to unite all of those different elements, and obviously he's then killed off at the end. The first gentleman goes on to say that she's sunshine and rain at once, so compared very much to nature, you know, compare that to all the unnatural imagery that Commode talks about earlier on, that Edmund talks about in his soliloquy. She's very, very, you know, very, very, very natural. And linked to nature on line 21, there was a happy smile that played on her ripe lip. So again, it's the image of fruit and nature and fullness. Again, it's youth, you know, she like a ripe fruit is sort of putting things right. And also it's that image of female beauty. Line 30, that becomes even more explicit. The first gentleman saying there, she shook the holy water from her heavenly eyes. So, you know, her tears are actually compared to holy water. So you've got Gloucester's bleeding eyes and you've got Cordelia's holy water. Again, the image is clear that Cordelia is there to heal, to make things better, which makes the ending even more shocking. On to Act 4, Scene 4, or Scene 18, Cordelia actually speaks now, she's back on stage, and she's talking about Lear, who is singing aloud, line 2, and crowned with rank fumitor and furrow weeds. Basically, he's got a crown of weeds on his head. Now, Shakespeare's emphasising his fall from grace. You know, remember the very, very first scene, the crown is all important. Lear is crowned and he's passing that power on. Here he's crowned with weeds to emphasise his fall from grace. But then, compare that to all the natural imagery we've just had, he's actually crowned with natural things. He's crowned with plants. So there's also that idea alongside it that there's something really positive about this. He's gone from having this symbol of corruption ultimately, because, you know, the crown is what they all fight over, to something totally natural. So again, it sets up, although he's lost power, it sets up that idea of healing, setting up the idea that Cordelia and Albany and Edgar between them are sort of putting things right, that they're ripe fruit to getting rid of the corruption of the old system. And then Cordelia explains, about line sort of 22-ish, her last sort of speech of this scene. She talks about basically, "Oh dear father, it is thy business that I go about, therefore great France my mourning and important tears hath pitied. No blown ambition doth our arms incite, but love, dear love, and our aged father's right, soon may I hear and see him." So obviously it foreshadows this meeting that's about to come. But basically Shakespeare's at pains there to stress that yes, Cordelia is technically being a traitor here. She's invading a country to fight, you know, Goneril and fight Regan. But Shakespeare at pains to stress here that this is a noble decision. This is something totally positive that she's doing. My mourning and important tears are at the heart. Again, the holy water, the healing thing. No blown ambition doth our arms incite. So in Shakespeare's time, in Jacobean times, ambition was seen as being a terrible thing. That was linked very much to Machiavelli. Ambition wasn't maybe how we see it today. It was something that meant basically doing whatever you want to get what you can. Macbeth is a play all about ambition. He will do whatever to be king. Shakespeare's at pains there to stress right at the end of this scene that this isn't Cordelia's motive, that her motives are far more lofty. The next scene shows Regan and Oswald talking. Basically, Regan's got wind of this letter that Goneril sent, professing her lust really rather than love to Edmund. Interestingly, the first Christian king in Britain was called Oswald, and there's talk about whether Shakespeare deliberately uses that name for Oswald the Steward, who, remember, is incredibly loyal, so actually sums up some Christian values, but obviously in a really terrible way. He's not a moral character at all, and there's arguments that maybe Shakespeare sets up this very loyal servant but loyal to the wrong causes to show that blind loyalty is flawed. Yes, Kent is blindly loyal and good, but Oswald is blindly loyal and bad. Blind loyalty doesn't work. The answer isn't in Machiavellian politics, but it isn't in the blind loyalty of the old system either. And Regan basically realises about this secret letter. She says, line 21, 22, let me unseal the letter. She's desperate to look at what's been sent. And I think there's an irony there that Edmund obviously used a letter that he had written to frame Edgar, and now the plans are unravelling because of a letter that Goneril has sent to Edmund. So there's that real poetic justice coming out here, that all of them are undermined by their own ambitions. Again, Shakespeare's, I think, at pains to suggest that. We get Cordelia invading for the right reasons versus the ambition of Regan, Goneril, and Edmund that is seen as pretty much entirely bad. So that's the next couple of scenes, and then it's a much longer scene, which is scene 20.